Finally, I'd had enough. I said, "All right, come here." It was a mistake, and a big one. But I walked with him over to a section of hard floor and told him I was going to put a front chin lock on him. If it hurt too much and he wanted out, all he had to do was tap my leg or something. So I went to put my hand on his back, and when I did, boom, the drummer hit a rim shot, and Belzer took a pratfall. It was funny. I should have gone with it. Now there's a way to put a front chin lock on somebody where it won't hurt, but that's not the way Hiro Matsuda taught me. He showed me the submission hold version of the front chin lock, where you press a bone in your arm against the carotid artery in the other guy's neck. If you do that, you can make somebody pass out in a second with just 5 pounds of pressure. By the time I grabbed hold of Richard Belzer, I was pumped to the eyeballs with adrenaline. I reached in, cinched up, and gave him about 5 pounds of pressure, and I felt his body go totally limp. I thought I'd better let him go, but instead of letting him down gently, like I should have, I panicked and let him go all at once. He collapsed like a wet noodle and hit the ground. Wham! Then the strangest thing happened. He jumped right up again and looked stupefied, like a dog hit by a car that didn't know which way to run. Finally, he stared into the camera and said, "We'll be right back." Then he turned to me and Belzer said, "Hey, that was great. That was really great." All of a sudden, the producer and the assistant said, Richard, you're bleeding." Belzer said, What do you mean?" He didn't know where he was. It was like he was unconscious, but still talking somehow. Then they took him over to his makeup chair and put some compresses on the back of his head. The producer asked me, "How could you do this to him?" I said I did what he asked for. I put a wrestling hold on him. Of course, I knew I'd screwed up. I said to Belzer, "I'm sorry, man. I didn't know you'd hit your head when I let go." He told me, "Don't worry, man. No problem. It was great. Thank you." Yeah, right. Anyway, the producer asked us to go back on the air and explain what happened. I said, "Sure." So when we were live again, I said, "Look, man, I made a mistake. The guy asked me to put him in a wrestling hold. I warned him against it because I was afraid he'd get hurt. I wanted him to tap my leg, but he didn't do it. Then he passed out and hit his head on the floor. I apologize." And the producer was going with it. "Yeah, this is something you guys shouldn't try at home. Kids, you see how accidents can happen." Mr. T hadn't opened his mouth the whole time. All of a sudden, he decided to talk. "Hell," he said, "that fool deserved what he got. Hulk Hogan's the champion of the world. What's wrong with that idiot?" I went, "Oh no." "Yeah, he was lucky he didn't get killed." He was on a roll. "Next time we'll get the rest of you stupid fools." Oh my God, I thought, Mr. T, please shut up. No such luck. "The fool should have known better," T went on. "Stupid idiot. What is he, crazy? He should know he's messing with Mr. T and Hulk Hogan, the champion of the world." He just went on and on and on. I said to myself, we're dead. On the way back to the hotel, we started laughing our asses off. The thing was so bizarre. It was so funny. When we got back to the Helmsley Palace, T started breaking chairs and stuff. "I told him not to mess with us," he said. He was going crazy, taking credit for everything that happened. I thought, oh my God, he's nuts. He's out of control. About 2 weeks later, it wasn't too funny anymore because Richard Belzer hit me and Mr. T and Vince McMahon with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. All of a sudden, Mr. T wasn't laughing anymore. For months and months, we went back and forth with Belzer's lawyers. Finally, it looked like we were going to have to go to court. Belzer was asking for $5 million in damages, but we had a feeling the jury would see Vince in his deep pockets and award Belzer a lot more. So Vince, Mr. T, and I split the money and paid Richard Belzer off, and I thought that was the end of it. In the meantime, my wife Linda had decided to build her dream house in Florida. She was so into it that she oversaw the whole thing, acted as general contractor and everything. She brought in artisans from all over the world. It was a huge project, and it seemed to get bigger every minute. But when she was done, she had an authentic French farmhouse, almost 20,000 square feet in size. It looks just like something you see in Burgundy. The roof on it, which was imported from Europe, is almost 400 years old. 3 or 4 years ago, I got on an airplane and picked up a magazine. As soon as I opened it, I saw a picture of Richard Belzer. He was sitting in Nice, France, in front of his authentic French farmhouse. I started reading the article. Belzer was saying, "Thanks to the settlement I got in the Hulk Hogan lawsuit, we came straight over here and bought this house." I took the magazine home and showed it to my wife. She went nuts. It was a good settlement from our point of view, but I guess it was still a lot of money, enough for Belzer to go out and buy a house in France. According to the article, he named it Shea Hogan. WrestleMania 2 set an all-time wrestling attendance record, but the record wouldn't stand for long. Not with WrestleMania 3 pitting Hulk Hogan against his longtime rival, Andre the Giant, on March 29, 1987. Hulkamania was hot as hell, and I was at the pinnacle of my popularity, the biggest attraction in wrestling at the time. And the guy I would be going up against had been the biggest attraction in wrestling up until that time. There was no telling what we could draw with a combination like that. We built up a storyline in which Andre was getting jealous of me. Things really started to heat up at a TV taping in my hometown of Tampa, where I was doing an interview with Roddy Piper. Andre came out in the middle of it and challenged me to a match. He reached up and ripped the crucifix right off my chest. Then he threw it on the ground. That set the stage for the Battle of the Titans between Andre the Giant and the immortal Hulk Hogan, who wanted to be the only giant left standing. Andre had a bad back at the time. If he had the mentality of some of the other wrestlers I've met, the match in the Silverdome in Detroit would have never taken place. But Andre was old school. Wrestling was his life. When he had to work injured, he didn't complain. He just got into the ring and did his job. But because I knew Andre's back was bad, I gave some thought to helping him out. When he was on the mat and he had to get up, I made sure that he was close to the ropes so he could use them to pull himself up. So I laid out the whole match. I had Andre body slamming me a couple times and stepping on my back, the whole thing. Then Vince took my plan and went to Andre and told him he wanted Andre to lose the match in front of the largest crowd in the history of wrestling. I'm sure Andre would have loved to have been 15 years younger and squashed Hulk Hogan in the middle of the ring, but he was a businessman. So when Vince McMahon asked Andre if he would let me win, out of respect for me, Andre said yes. Without a doubt, the fans are going to see the greatest moment in wrestling history. But I got a notion in my head that we could take it one step further. Before the match started, I told Andre I just didn't want to beat him. I wanted really to give the people something they could tell their grandchildren. I wanted to body slam him. It was a crazy idea. I had slammed Andre back in 1980, but he weighed a lot more now, and he was so big that his crotch was at the same height as the middle of my chest. He said he didn't think I could lift him, and I said, "Well, brother, we're going to find out." When we got to that point in the match, my first move was to get my arm between his legs. That was pretty hard, considering his thighs touched almost all the way down to his knees. Then I had to get him to come toward me, so I pushed him into the ropes, and as he came forward again, I pulled him in and used his momentum to pick him up. The problem was, I could only get him up so far. I couldn't turn him because he was too heavy, almost 700 pounds, so I just heaved as hard as I could and turned him the rest of the way. But when I did that, I tore my back out. If you look at me now, I've got a big hole in my back muscle where it tore right in half that night. That was the price I paid to lift Andre the Giant. But I got him. I turned him, slammed him, and then I pinned him. It was something that happened once and will never happen again. If I hadn't made it all the way, I would have been screwed. Andre would have probably fallen on me and probably killed me. I had him up so high he would have crushed me to death. And there was nothing I could have done about it. If you look at the tape of that match, you can see Andre's knuckles were dragging on the ground when I picked him up. He was so damn big, his leg was almost as big as my whole body, but somehow I slammed him. In the late 80s, my family life was a roller coaster ride. Peaks and valleys, brother, good and bad. The bad came first, in 1987, when I got word that my brother Alan had passed away. Alan had a long history of problems. He had been in and out of Florida jails and ended up going to Texas under a different name. He just took off and started another life. Then he got in trouble in Texas and ended up moving to LA, where he got remarried and had a child named David Bolea. But trouble found him in LA too. He ended up partying a lot and running with the wrong group of people. At one point, Alan tried to pull himself together and went through a drug treatment program. I saw him right after that. I dropped him off at his house in LA, gave him money for his rent, his van, and his motorcycle, and asked him if he wanted to come to San Francisco to watch me wrestle at the Cow Palace. He said he wanted to stay in LA, so I went up to San Francisco on my own. I had just finished my match and came out of the ring when I was handed a note saying there was an emergency or something. By the time I called the number and got hold of somebody at the hospital, my brother was dead. He was in a hotel room all by himself when he died. The official cause of death was a heart attack. There must have been a catalyst. It's pretty rare for somebody to lie down in a hotel room and have a heart attack. The news of his death rocked me pretty good, but my parents took it even worse. I remember how devastated they were, but I tell you, brother, they weren't surprised. We had all known that we'd get that call someday. Watching Alan struggle with his life was like watching somebody die of cancer for 10 years. We all thought that Alan's death was the worst news we could get, but it wasn't. Right after Alan died, his first wife, who was raising their kids in Florida, was murdered. It was like a 1-2 punch, and all of a sudden, their 3 kids were without a mother or a father. It was pretty stressful on my parents, and on me, because my mother and father were living on a fixed income at the time. Thank God I started making some money in the wrestling business, or it would have been even worse. As for Alan's kids, the 2 girls took it really hard. They cried and carried on the way you'd expect, but Alan's son Michael reacted differently. His whole demeanor changed after his parents died. All of a sudden, he stopped showing emotion. He was just stone-faced. Michael was about 12 years old when I took him on the wrestling circuit with me for a little while. We went to Chicago and to Madison Square Garden, and all the wrestlers he met were really nice. The first guys he met were Vince McMahon and Hercules Hernandez. We get off the elevator, and there they were, these 2 big guys and this skinny little kid. They said hello to him, and it brought a smile to his face. He told me after that, "I'm going to be a wrestler someday." And he did become a wrestler. He wrestled for about 12 years as Horace Hogan, all because of how nice the guys were to him. But it took us a long time to get over my brother's death. The good news started in 1988 with the birth of our first child, the baby girl we named Brooke. It bowled me over to think I had a daughter. Then a couple of years later, my son Nicholas came along. At that point, I was really overwhelmed. A daughter and a son. It just flipped me out. In one way, having 2 kids made me want to work harder. But in another way, it made me want to be home. And because I was still the man, I had to be really visible. But Vince cut me some slack so I could be with my family. By 1991, people were starting to learn that Hulk Hogan was human. Up until then, I had been wrapped in this superhero mystique. People accepted it at face value when I told them to train, say their prayers, and take their vitamins. Then, little by little, they found out I did more than train and say my prayers. I like to drink beer and raise hell at night. So I got into a little bit of trouble here and there. The fans started to turn on me, and I got booed a lot. And then I gave them something else to boo me about, because it wasn't just vitamins I was taking. I probably started taking anabolic steroids in 1975, but at the time, every wrestler I knew took them. I'm not making excuses, but they were everywhere. And a lot of that had to do with what we knew about them, which obviously wasn't enough. One thing we did know about steroids was they enhanced the way you looked and the way you performed. They made you bigger, stronger, and faster. What was especially important to wrestlers was that steroids helped you put on muscle mass. I never had a question about whether I would take them. It was part of my daily routine. Did you take a shower today? Yeah. Did you brush your teeth today? Yeah. Did you take your steroids today? Yeah. Hell yeah, let's go. That was the deal. It was how I lived. I'm 280 pounds now, but back then, I weighed 330 or 40 because my body was full of water weight. My face was huge and puffy, and my arms were so bulky I couldn't touch my shoulders. Anyway, the feds began an investigation of steroid use. And since Hulk Hogan was the most recognizable athlete entertainer in the world, they put my neck on the chopping block.